All right, everyone. The legacy media is having a real tough day because, link in the description, archived of course, the Trump economy has kicked in and 3% growth was achieved. Now, the economy had been growing anyway. There was a little bit of a slump there for a while, but it's come roaring back, basically. And this is not all Trump's doing. The deregulatory stance of the Trump administration in general, and people like RFK Jr., Lee Zeldin, Tulsi Gabbard, and others, has definitely been a help. And I have a feeling that that's going to put the economy into hyperdrive, actually, for some time. So this is an accomplishment, but they're casting it off as a defeat. Well, it was only 3%. Well, the economy is actually fragile and weak. Interesting. None of these outlets ever reported that when growth was reasonably steady under Joe Biden, and it was for quite some time. It just didn't outpace inflation. Now that it's outpacing inflation, all of a sudden it's a real big problem. You can't give Orange Man credit for anything. Nope, it's the Orange Man bad, you know? He's bad for the economy, he molests people all the time, and all sorts of crazy shit. That's basically the line that the legacy media has gone with. And so they're not willing to give Trump credit where credit is due under any circumstances. The fact is that the economy is in reasonable shape. The tariffs did not collapse the economy. This is, by the way, that's mainly what they're concerned about. The tariffs didn't collapse the economy. Trump hasn't, destroyed the dollar. He hasn't caused economic chaos. There was a little bit of shaky there for a while. But then other countries, because the United States is a net importer and a huge economy, they came to the table and they negotiated. And you get all sorts of trade deals and stuff like that. The other day, there was an article about the Japanese trade deal between the US and Japan. And I believe it was entitled, Why the Deal Won't Help the US Economy, and stuff like that. Dude, if Biden had minted a multi-billion-dollar deal, hundreds of billions actually, with Japan, you would be screaming from the rooftops about how he was an economic genius. Yeah, because he managed to mint it. We've got deals with parts of Europe. We've got deals going on in Latin America. We've got more deals in Asia that are going through. It is working. The tariff war fundamentally is working, which is something that sane people expected to happen. It's something, therefore, that the TDS suffering legacy media doesn't want to happen. They would do anything in their power to stymie these trade deals. They would do anything in their power to reopen the border and then blame Trump for a border crisis or something like that. All of a sudden, if you have a net spike in immigration, Trump obviously is responsible because ultimately he's incapable of doing good in these people's eyes. And that's for a political reason. The political reason is basically they've been given their commands by their taskmasters. And so they're not allowed to actually admit when Donald Trump does something that would generally be conceived of as right. The economy grew. Well, it didn't grow enough. The unemployment is down. Well, yeah, but that's because Donald Trump booted people out of the federal workforce, and now they had to get private jobs and they got to reabsorb and stuff like that. This happens over and over again. They even tried to blame Donald Trump for the border crisis there for a little while. They realized it didn't go over so well with the public. When they conducted their polling about their messaging, they realized that that one was a mistake. It didn't work so well. About the only things that he's doing that I disagree with at the moment. He needs to expedite the process of releasing more material with regards to Epstein, because the liberals are having a field day with that. I mean, it's not really working, but at the same time, it is the right thing to do. And secondly, stop funding Ukraine, because that's just a losing issue at this point. It makes absolutely no sense. I like that he's putting more pressure on Russia and on Zelensky, by the way, to try to come to the table. That I approve of. But in the meantime, continuing to fund Ukraine when they're apparently capable of using fishing nets to do to drones, I don't think that they need our help anymore. I don't think that I need to be funding more bombs and shit like that. I don't think that it's necessary. The Trump economy, though, overall, so far, has been going well. GDP is growing steadily. The tariff war didn't do jack shit to harm the US economy. And again, that's the big point. And this is why they're attacking him. They were trying to tell the public for months that if Donald Trump decided to tariff other countries, which they do to us all of the time, that the economy would collapse. But the economy is growing. It didn't collapse. In fact, people are bringing manufacturing back to the United States. There's a reason for that, because they don't want to get tariffed, mainly. So the opposite of what Paul Krugman says is usually right. So when he said, well, this is going to crush the economy, it was pretty clear that the economy would actually be rising fairly quickly. And that's indeed what it's doing. Now, we've got a lot of lost ground to cover. That's the bad news. The bad news is that between the sticky Bidenflation and continued inflation, which you do have, although it's definitely slackened off quite a bit over the last year, that includes the latter part of Biden's term. He overcooked the economy, but the damage is slowly being reabsorbed. The bad news is it's going to take probably a couple of years in order to ameliorate the damage that was done. It'll probably take about 2 years to do that. So Trump is capable of generating an energy surplus, stabilizing the economy, all these other things, and I think he'll be successful in doing so, but it will take time. Trump's problem is a little bit different. He is an elected official. He's a partisan. He's a Republican, and so forth. Donald Trump will need to very, very bravely face his fan base, especially through the midterms, while the economy continues to slowly rebuild itself. And people don't have a lot of patience. So when their patience runs out, they'll be like, hey, Donald, why haven't you waved that economic magic wand yet? I'm still without a job. Hey, Trump, inflation's still high. Just had to pay $8.99 for a fucking jar of pickles. Ultimately, the buck stops here. He's going to get the blame for that at some point, even if there's not much he can do about it. Now, he's taking all the right steps, generally speaking. So I'm going to give him credit for that. And I think that his economic proposals generally, deregulation, slashing taxes, maintaining the personal tax reductions that he himself imposed years ago, and so forth, these will all help the economy. Those are all good things. The problem is that there are always going to be some people who are going to complain anyway because things aren't moving fast enough, and also people who will complain because they simply don't like him because he has an R after his name. And this has happened before. Hell, there were a couple of proposals that Biden made that made sense. Burying, electronic lines and so forth in the ground to weatherize them and so forth, which he never followed through with, but the concept was a good idea. And so even then, even Joe Biden gets credit for a couple of things. But I mean, again, he never carried through with, so that's sad. But at the same time, when the economy was overcooked by Joe Biden, and it is his responsibility with his infrastructure bill and shit like that, ultimately he got the blame for it, including within the infrastructure bill, that proposal was actually included. It's just I don't see any evidence of it actually happening because there are electrical lines literally right out in front of this office at the moment. They don't appear to have been buried. But since they're trenching out to make a sidewalk, they probably could have done that at the same time. I noticed that they decided not to do so. Oops, I guess Chisana Drive is left behind by Biden's infrastructural plan. Trump is doing a good job, especially on the economy. He's doing better than in his first term, and he's been more actionable than in his first term. And part of this is, part of the reason why is because he's hired better people. When you've got RFK Jr., Lee Zeldin, you've got Tulsi Gabbard, Elise Stefanik, and people like that, Marco Rubio, ironically enough, that's a lot better than the people that he hired the first time around. So it seems like he is delegating authority better. I'd like to see him make it even more machine-like, actually. But we'll see what happens. We'll see what happens in the next quarter with GDP. That's about all. Peace out.